Hey chess lovers and friends, welcome back to Casper Chess. Today I've put together a special collection of my favorite Tennison Gambit videos for you. I noticed that many of you might have missed some of these amazing gems, so I have organized them all in one place for easy access. Stay tuned and enjoy. Hey guys, what's up? What if I told you that there are quite a number of ways in which you can play the famous Tennison Gambit trap that I showed you in this video? I'm talking about this common trap where you sacrifice your e4 pawn intending to get it back, but black defends, then you go d3, black takes, bishop takes, and hey, then you see all of a sudden your opponent plays the top played move pawn to h6, which is a blunder because of knight takes f7. After the king takes, you go bishop g6 check. The king can no longer go back because of our bishop, and after king takes, you grab their free queen on d8. Since many people seem to know this Tennison Gambit trap, I want to show you some alternatives to this amazing trap in this short video. In case you're new, my name is Casper. Alright, first alternative in the bird opening. So you begin with pawn to f4, then again you can see pawn to d5 is by far the top played move, after which I recommend you go pawn to e4 directly. They'll play d takes e4. I'm playing against the Lichess database, you guys, so this is very fun to watch. Bishop c4, and then you can see knight to f6 is what most of your opponents will play, and then right away, instead of going knight to c3, playing like a normal person, you want to go crazy with pawn to d4. And I should mention to say that in the opening stage, you are basically giving up your advantage, but it will be very difficult for your opponents to maintain that advantage unless you are playing against a robot like Stockfish or whatever, which I don't encourage people to do. So again, after you play pawn to d4, you can see that e takes d3 is by far the top played move, after which I recommend that you pre-move knight e2, or play this as fast as you can, because it creates an impression as if you just blundered a piece. This is why we see everybody on Lichess taking this poor knight, which is a blunder. Why is this a blunder? Because you have bishop takes f7 check. The only move for black is king takes f7, after which you win the free queen on d8, just like that. Awesome. I guess you now know the idea. Let's move on. Second alternative, in the Pirc defense or in the Pirc defense, you simply start with pawn to e4, where black responds with d6. But what I want you guys to play is simply pawn to e5. Check in the Lichess database, you guys. Look at this. D takes e5 is the top played move, which is what we want to see, okay? Because now we are going to play knight f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Oh, wait a second. I don't know how much we are going to see the Tennison Gambit ideas, you guys. The idea is that if knight to f6, again we go pawn to d3. So that if black takes, we take back with a bishop. And again, according to the Lichess database, pawn to h6 is by far the top played move. After which you do what? Sack on f7, forking the queen and the rook on h8. So that if king takes, you still go bishop g6 check, and the king cannot go back as this square is still covered by our light squared bishop. So they will have to take our bishop, after which we take the free queen. Now wait a second, don't skip, you guys. I have a surprise for you. A very big blunder that most white players make from here after black plays knight c6 is to take on c7. I mean, look at the Lichess database, you guys. Queen takes c7 is by far the top played move. What's wrong with people? You guys, this is a very terrible blunder, and I'm going to show you why. The correct move here is queen d1 or maybe queen d3, which I like playing. Let's see what happens after queen takes c7. Now black can simply go pawn to e5 and your queen is trapped, okay? It has no squares to go to. It cannot escape, okay? All these squares are covered by black's pieces, so don't take on c7, please, you guys. This is a very terrible blunder that most YouTubers don't cover. And now, I guess you've known it. For example, after you play knight c3, black just needs to play knight e8 to win this queen. It cannot go anywhere. So don't play queen takes c7, you guys. In this position, I suggest you go queen d3 check, provoking the move bishop f5, and only then do you play queen g3 check, Casper's signature move, and after king h7, you now take the pawn on c7. What's the difference here? The light squared bishop is no longer guarding the b7 pawn, so if pawn to e5 comes, we can now grab this b7 pawn. I mean, even if rook c8 is played, we simply go queen takes b7, and now our queen will not be trapped, okay? By the way, knight d4 aims at taking on c2 in order for black to win our rook on a1. So that's why we play knight a3. Very important to keep an eye on this c2 square. E.g., if black foolishly takes on c2 with this bishop, thinking we are going to take back, well, that hangs the rook on c8. So clearly, this doesn't work for black. So hope you liked that as well. If you did, hit the like button and subscribe if you're new for more wonderful videos. Right, let's move on. Third alternative in the Sicilian defense. Let's see how that goes. So here we are playing as white and we begin with pawn to e4. As you can see in the master's database, pawn to c5, which is the Sicilian defense, turns out to be the most common response, at least from intermediate to super GM level. And that's what we are looking at. Anyways, after pawn to c5, I recommend you go pawn to c3. And this is officially called the alapine variation. I have another video where I covered the move knight to f6 on the second move, and so we are not going to cover this move in this video. Instead, the move that we are looking at is pawn to d5, which is the second most played move. In fact, pawn to d5 is what most advanced players think is the ultimate solution to the alapine variation. But wait, let me switch over to the Lichess database, because from here I'm just going to be showing you the top played moves. That's what you're going to see. So after d5 by black, I recommend you play in a gambit style, beginning with the move knight to f3. This invites black to take on e4 since this pawn is now a free pawn. So black will take the e4 pawn, after which you play knight g5. So seeing that we want to take back our pawn, black will be tempted to defend it with knight to f6. What do we do? Well, here I recommend you just go pawn to d3, sacrificing another pawn. And as you can see in the Lichess database, e takes d3 is by far the top played move, which you're going to see. And now I recommend you just take back this pawn. What? Can you see this? Pawn to h6 in this position is by far the top played move, which you are going to see most of your unprepared opponents playing. And guess what? This is the blunder of the century, because we can now sacrifice our knight on f7 by taking, double attacking two of black's pieces, the queen and the rook. If king takes, yeah, we have two possible moves, either bishop g6, which directly wins the queen, or bishop c4, e.g. bishop g6 check, and the king cannot go back, so black has to take, and then that's how we win the free queen on d8. If black chooses not to take with the king, but to go queen d5, well, we have this move, knight takes h8. Because if they take our free pawn on g2, we can safely win the queen by playing bishop g6 check. Our queen is doing a great job of covering this file. So the only move is for black to give up his queen, and from here we should go on to win. And that's how we can easily transpose the game back into the Tennison gambit ideas. Alright, now the fourth alternative to the Tennison trap is in the French defense. Let's see how that goes. So this is where you start with e4, then your opponent goes e6, pawn to d3, then instead of going pawn to d4, in rapid blitz or bullet, you can try pawn to d3, after which you will see them playing pawn to d5 like always. Now you go knight to f3, allowing them to take your e4 pawn, because you want to go knight g5, wanting to take back the pawn. If e takes d3, yep, you can take back with your bishop, but I like knight c3, just testing your opponent's patience. And hey, look at this. D takes c2 is by far the top played move once again, which is a blunder, because this allows you to take your opponent's queen if they take back. Now you go knight takes f7 check, and on the next move, let's say king e7, you're going to win the free rook on h8. If you count material, you are simply up a piece, and at worst, if they manage to trap your knight, you're going to be an exchange up forever, and this will be good for your eyeballs. Now, it's not every time your opponent to take on c2, sometimes they may go knight to f6, and this is when you want to take back on d3. If they play pawn to h6, you don't sack your knight, better go knight g e4, and if they play the top played move bishop e7, you just want to continue developing your pieces normally. And now if h6 comes when your opponent has already castled short, you don't even do anything about that knight. You can go pawn to h4, sacrificing your knight on g5 so that if they take, you can take back with your pawn. Now you want to take back their knight. If they go knight d5, the top played move, this will be a mate in 3, ladies and gentlemen, which begins with rook h8, or you can go queen h5 first, but this is straightforward and easy to find. Again, after pawn to h4, if they don't take your knight, and let's say they play something like knight c6, your knight is the safest piece on earth. All you can do is just to castle along and continue playing your game as if your knight is not under attack. Remember that your king's rook is still controlling the h file should black take this knight. By the way, you are just one move away from winning black's queen on d8 if they don't do anything sensible about their queen. Anyways, now after knight to g5 attacking black's pawn on e4, black does not necessarily have to hold on to this pawn with the move knight to f6. They can also try bishop f5 holding on to this pawn, and here I recommend that to play knight c3 attacking this pawn once again. And if knight to f6 again, if you watched my previous video on the Tennison Gambit, you already know the right move, bishop c4 attacking the weak f7 square. Now this time, black will think by playing e6, he has solved all the problems regarding the f7 square. And that's why in this position, I recommend that you play the calm move, pawn to f3. If black doesn't do anything with our pawn on f3, we are just simply going to take back the pawn and be good. And so you're going to see most of your opponents taking on f3, after which you should take back with the queen, eyeballing the b7 square. And here, believe it or not, most of the times you're going to see black covering the b7 pawn with pawn to c6, after which you should unleash the move knight takes on f7, again forking the queen and the rook. This time, black may think he can still capture the knight on f7, forgetting that we can take his bishop on f5, because his pawn on e6 he's pinned to the king. Now after realizing this, you will see black playing queen to d6, after which we are going to play knight to e4, forking black's queen and the knight on f6. Here black's response is forced, queen e7 will be played, knight g5 check, and then we're going to win the pawn on e6 and castle short. And in this position, white is winning. And so guys, if at all you're enjoying this video so far, please consider subscribing and hit the like button so that I can be encouraged to make more wonderful videos just like this one. Therefore, I'm giving you 4 seconds to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Okay, let's go to the next one. After knight f3 and your opponent plays the top played move pawn to d5, you still go pawn to e4, and after de, you go knight g5. Now, I'm sure you already know this plan of sacrificing our knight on f7. I mean, after knight f6, d3, pawn takes, bishop takes, and pawn to h6. But here is a move that most of my opponents are playing nowadays. Instead of pawn to h6, most of them are playing knight bd7, and their argument is you won't have knight takes f7 sacrifice because they are going to freely take your knight, and there is no way you're going to win their queen on d8 like we do in the normal Tennison Gambit. And so to avoid this line, most of my opponents are playing knight bd7, shielding their queen before playing pawn to h6. So what I recommend here is to leave your knight on g5. Why? Because we're still waiting for pawn to h6 anyways. So here you can just go ahead and castle short. Now see what is happening in the Lichess database once again, you guys. Again, pawn to h6 is the top played move in this position. So after your opponent plays pawn to h6, I want to ask you a simple question. What do you do in this position? Or let me just say, find the best move in this position that wins the game on the spot. I give you 4 seconds. Let's go. My God, I can't believe you guys are still looking at knight takes f7. What's wrong with your eyeballs? If you sacrifice on f7, again, black can just take and you won't be able to win their queen on d8. The move in this position, ladies and gentlemen, is knight e6, which wins black's queen on the spot. And here, black should resign. Say, what if they play f takes e6? Well, this invites bishop g6 checkmate. In fact, to annoy my opponent, what I can do here is to sacrifice my queen first. And after knight takes, I go bishop g6 check, because I don't listen. Anyway, so in this position, you are guaranteed to win black's queen. Where did I steal this idea from? Well, there is this line in the Sicilian defense where you begin with e4, and after pawn to c5, you go knight f3. The moment black plays d6, you forget about pawn to d4. The move I recommended in one of my old videos was knight g5, a dubious looking move. And the whole idea is to test black's patience. If black plays pawn to h6 because they are not comfortable with your knight sitting on g5, this is when you surprise them with this bishop check. And the moment black plays the top played move, bishop d7, played by over 140 suspects, this is when you simply go knight e6, ladies and gentlemen, to win your opponent's queen. Again, if black takes your knight like this, you have a mate in two. I don't even need to show you this, you guys. Again, see that black can't take your knight with their bishop because the light squared bishop is pinned to the king. If bishop takes b5, you have knight takes queen and you are winning. So in this position, black should find queen b6, after which you can oversimplify the game as demonstrated, and here black has to capture back with the knight to avoid losing their right to castle, after which you now go pawn to d3 and continue playing in the style of the Grand Prix attack, knowing you already sorted out your light squared bishop problem. We see a similar trap in the Vanguard opening, which I discovered a few weeks ago, beginning with the move knight c3, and after pawn to d5, you go pawn to e4. If pawn takes, you take back with your knight. And once again, what do we see in the Masters database? Knight d7, the top played move. Should black play this move, again you can now play knight g5, testing their patience. And the whole idea is to go knight e6, once again if they play pawn to h6. So, pop, and this is how you win their queen. Now some of you might ask, does this even happen in real life? Or can this work against higher rated opponents? The answer is yes. In fact, here is a game that I played 3 hours ago. Today, I started with pawn to e4, and then my opponent responded with d5, the Scandinavian defense, after which I played knight f3, they took on e4, I played knight g5, and then after knight f6, I played pawn to d3, because that's the only thing I know. ed was played, I took back with my light squared bishop, waiting for this so that I could sacrifice my knight on f7. In this position, my 2108 rated opponent, called William1342, played knight bd7, and here is where I realized this strategy by first of all playing knight c3. It was also fine to castle short, but this was a bullet match anyways. My opponent then played pawn to h6, which I highly expected to see, after which I shocked them with a move knight e6. So you always want your opponent to make this blunder so that you can have this checkmate possibility. At this point, my opponent took on e6, after which I delivered this beautiful checkmate. Anyway, now, after you take back on d3 with your light squared bishop, say black doesn't play knight bd7, what if they play knight c6? At least they are still defending their queen on d8, so you won't have that Tennison gambit trap where you capture a free queen. In this position, I recommended playing knight c3, and the point is after pawn to h6, at least you go knight ge4, and if knight takes, you take back with your knight, and from here you will see most of your opponents playing pawn to e6 because they want to develop their dark squared bishop and castle short. One of the lines I can recommend is this one where you slow down black's kingside development, beginning with the move queen f3. Say, what if black plays knight e5? Well, now you go queen g3. At least they are not going to, develop their dark squared bishop due to queen takes g7 in the near future. But what if they take on d3 with a knight? That's okay, you recapture with your pawn. And look at this. They won't be able to play bishop e7 due to queen takes g7. Oh, they have bishop b4 check. But see, here you can just play knight c3 and still they have a question to answer. They can't castle short because you have bishop takes h6. If they take, well and good, you are controlling the center with your c pawn and your d pawn. If they play queen d4, defending the g7 pawn and also putting pressure on your c3 knight, well, you can just castle short. This is the beauty. If they take, it means they don't really know what they are doing because you can just take back, and after queen takes, you go rook b1. You just have so many open lines and you're going to capture back those pawns. Say queen f6, because what else? Here, instead of playing bishop b2, you can even play bishop a3, completely stopping them from castling short. Look at their king, which is still on the center of the board. And look at the eval bar, you guys. Stockfish approves that white has a slight advantage and able to handle this position very well. You are attacking the c7 pawn. If pawn to c6 is played, for some reason. You can even go pawn to h4. It will be hardly easy for black to improve their king. Bishop d7, I mean, what are we doing? You have rook takes b7. So this is not easy for black. If they ask for a queen trade, you say no and go queen c7. Look at this. If queen f6, here you can even sacrifice your rook on b7. Knowing if bishop takes, you're simply going to harass that rook. And the only place for this rook is d8, after which you can take like this. Rook d7, only move. Now you go rook b1. What are we talking about? Queen d8, only sensible move, but rook b7 is even sharper than a sword. If pawn to f6 or pawn to f5, you have queen takes e6 check. Okay, let's just make any random move. The point is that you're just going to capture everything. Say pawn to g6, you have rook a8, winning the queen. So this is one line I recommend. If black plays knight c6 instead of knight bd7, you just go knight c3 and then oversimplify the game like that. If pawn to e6, you simply develop your queen, inviting knight e5 so that you put your queen on g3, attacking this. You're going to have an active game. Right. Trap number 2 against the Pirc or the Pirc defense. So you start with e4, your opponent plays d6, trying to avoid your Tennison gambit, your Leonard trap, and also your Scotch gambit traps. Well, even against this, there's a way in which you can punish black by taking on f7. So you just go d4, and once they play knight to f6, it's high time you go bishop c4, sacrificing your pawn on e4 for free. And see what people play on leeches. Knight takes e4, the top played move. Bishop takes f7 now becomes a possibility because after king takes, you have queen h5 check. Once again, even though you're not winning the queen, as in the Leonard gambit, at least you're going to walk away with a knight. Now, yes, I understand this is still equal according to Stockfish, but at human level, someone may be out of his prep. Here, like the king is not that safe, you're about to push h4 and h5, destroy the king side. But most importantly, you first of all develop your minor pieces like this, your knight, and probably you castle long in the long run. So the main goal is just to make black lose his right to castle and also just taking him out of his prep. This reminds me of trap number 3, which I covered briefly in the past. That happens in the Alekhine's defense, where you start with e4, then black plays knight to f6. Just pretend for a second as if you lack patience and pre-move bishop c4. The idea is still the same. After knight takes, you just want to make black lose his right to castle, take him out of his prep, go queen h5 check. And after pawn to g6, you go queen d5 check. After e6, you just get back your piece. And the strategy is very simple. h4, h5 to destroy black's king side. After developing your knight, pawn to d4, then bishop g5, knight c3. In the near future, you're just going to castle long. This is how you play, especially if you don't know much theory. You just want to play freestyle chess to confuse the enemy. We go pawn to e4. They play c5, the Sicilian defense. And then we go knight f3, and then they play pawn to d6. This may lead to the Najov variation. We still go pawn to d4, pawn takes, knight f6 attacking our pawn. And so we first of all play this little trick, bishop c4, giving up our e-pawn. I mean, if knight takes, we're going to sack on f7 once again. I covered this trick in the video that has popped up in the card above, so feel free to check that as well after finishing to watch this video. So they'll play pawn to s6, which is still the modern variation. After knight c3, now this is the Najov variation, okay? But the move that should always be in your mind is knight to c6. If you see this move, I suggest you take that knight. You're going to see them taking with their b-pawn. And that's when you push the pawn to e5. Now, wait a second. The best black can do here is to simply go back to d7, which appears to be a dubious move that can only be played by engines. For example, the top played move here according to Stockfish is knight g4 by black. But here we can simply go pawn to e6, cutting the communication between the bishop and the knight. So we can freely take the knight, as you can see. And you're going to see black playing knight e5 to save his knight, also attacking our bishop on c4. But hey, we don't care. We just go on and take on f7 once again. And if knight takes f7, we simply take with our bishop, making black to lose his right to castle. And not only that, we play the move queen f3 check, targeting 2 squares at the same time. So that's what happens if black decides to play knight g4 after we play pawn to e5. The second most played move in this position is d takes e5, which is a blunder because we have bishop takes f7 check, and the only move here is king takes f7, after which we take the free queen on d8 and black has to resign. There's one variation that I've always wanted to show you guys in the Tennison Gambit. For example, after knight f3, instead of them playing pawn to d5, which is the top played move, you will see them playing this weird looking pawn move f5. Now this is for you guys who still love the Tennison Gambit, but yet you find it difficult to approach this line. Well, you can still continue with your Tennison Gambit ideas of pushing pawn to e4. The idea is that after black takes, you simply go knight g5, counter-attacking the pawn, right? And this is what they do, by the way. I should mention to say this is the Dutch variation, and you are going to see why you need to know how to punish Dutch players. Anyway, after knight g5, first of all, I would like to mention that pawn to h6 is impossible because of queen h5 check, and on the next move you're going to mate black, so you're not going to see your opponents doing that. Instead, black usually defends this pawn on e4 like this, with knight f6. Now what I want you to do is to simply go pawn to d3. You just want them to take, right? Yeah, and that's the top played move. After which you take back with your light squared bishop. Now you are putting more pressure on the h7 pawn. So if black is not careful, you might even end up winning this pawn. For example, the top played move in the Lichess database, as you can see, is pawn to e5, which is not even good enough, because now you can take the free pawn on h7, or rather taking back your pawn which you sacrificed with tempo. For example, if knight takes h7, this may lead to an immediate checkmate if white knows what he is doing. For example, you can go queen h5 check, and after king e7 you go queen f7 check, king d6 only move, and then what? You want to bring your opponent's king out of his territory, so you go knight e4 check, they'll go king c6 only move, and then you go queen c4 check. You can see again black only has one sensible move, king b6, after which you go knight bc3. Anything is playable, by the way, but when you have a possibility to checkmate your opponent quickly, what you want to do is to be extra patient and make sure that every move you play is the only correct move. So you need to exercise patience if you want to mate your opponent in style. For example, after knight bc3, black may play c6 or f5. It doesn't even matter, because now you have bishop e3 check. Again, the more pieces you bring in the game, the higher chances you have to win the game. For example, if king c7, you simply have knight d5 or simply knight b5 checkmate. Going back a few moves, where we took on h7, after pawn to e5 was played, in case black takes back with a rook, this time you can just do the same thing, and even though you are not going to mate your opponent anytime soon, you are assured of winning their knight after queen h5 check. Black just has to resign in this position. And so this is how you can still continue with your Tennison Gambit ideas, even if black responds with a Dutch variation of the Zukertort opening. Again, just remember to go pawn to e4 after they take. You go knight g5, it's not much of a stretch. There's another line that you're going to see very often where black plays knight f6, and after pawn to d3, they don't take on d3 immediately. Instead, they just keep on developing normally like they do in the normal Tennison Gambit, beginning with pawn to d5. And while I don't advise to take on e4, even though that is completely fine, what I advise people to do, especially in blitz, is to wait. You give black one more chance to blunder by playing bishop e2. This is a very tricky move, once again, ladies and gentlemen. Again, if black takes, you are just going to take back with your bishop. That's not a problem. Black still doesn't have pawn to h6, by the way, because this time, instead of queen h5, you have bishop g6 check. And next, you might want to plant your knight on f7 and maybe win black's rook on h8. So if black continues with something like pawn to e5, you want to play e4. Once again, you can just go ahead and sacrifice your knight on h7 or your bishop. It doesn't matter, because if they go pawn to e4, you have check first, or you can just go ahead and take the knight. But what you want to do is to divide attention so that you can take any of their minor pieces. By the way, black doesn't have to take your bishop because you can simply save your knight this way, and next you're going to put it on f4. You are simply fine in this position. Look at black's pawn structure, and I can only wish to be white in this position. So again, you are safe playing this line, but let me just show you one more line that black may play. The reason why we play bishop e2 on move 5 after black plays pawn to d5 is that you want to give your opponent one more chance to blunder with the move pawn to h6, which looks logical. You're going to see this happening in most of your blitz games and also rapid games, because by this time your opponent may be thinking their knight is still stopping queen h5 check, but hey, that's why we played bishop e2 so that we can go bishop check. This happens in most of my games. For example, if I turn on the Lichess database and search for my name, you can see that I haven't lost a game in this line so far, which is a good sign. And not to mention that other people do play this with much success as well, 89% win rate. So white will be forced to play king d7, but this is when you can go knight f7, just like I said. And if queen e8 is played, you can simply go knight e5 check, and on the next move, grab their free queen on e8. This happens like magic. Again, the trick lies in playing bishop e2 on move 5, going through the line one more time. After knight f3, f5, e4, f takes e4, knight g5, knight f6, d3, and pawn to d5. Instead of taking on e4 like what Stockfish suggests, I recommend that you go bishop e2, just a silent move, enticing black to go pawn to h6 so that you can go bishop. They won't see this, I promise. Sometimes they may delay pawn to h6. Not that they've seen it, but maybe they just want to develop other moves. For example, pawn to e5, also paving way for their dark squad bishop, right? Again, if you want, you can just take on e4, that is okay, according to Stockfish, but we're still waiting for this, right? So just cast a shot if you want. I mean, there's still nothing wrong with this. If they take, here you can even take back with the queen if you want. But the whole idea is that at some point, they may be tempted to play pawn to h6 because they are not comfortable with this knight, after which you can safely go bishop h5 check. And on the next move, you plant your knight on f7. And even though this time you don't have knight takes e5 check, which wins the queen, you can simply play bishop g6. Because now you want to take the rook or just take the pawn while defending your bishop on g6. So this is for you guys who still love the Tennison Gambit. But why am I showing you this Tennison Gambit idea? Well, this is because oftentimes you will meet some Dutch players who are very tricky, and you will definitely need to recall these ideas. Never estimate the power of the Dutch, guys. You can make use of similar ideas even in the typical Dutch defense. I mean, after pawn to d4, assuming you are playing white pieces and your opponent plays pawn to f5, which is the Dutch defense, what I recommend against this is another tricky line beginning with queen d3. And I don't know why. If you check the Lichess database, most black players just blitz out knight f6 on move 2, which hangs the pawn on f5. I don't know why, but anyway, the main line is pawn to e6 in this position, but after this is when you play pawn to g4. It looks like a weird pawn sacrifice, but you just want to open up the king side if black doesn't take the pawn. So there's no need for black not to take that pawn anyways. After this, you now employ your wing gambit idea by sacrificing a second pawn. Black is going to take. Now, you always want to take with the knight because only the knight has a clear follow-up on g5. If pawn to h6, once again, you have queen g6 check. And if bishop e7, stopping you from going knight g5, you can still go knight f4. And this paves way for your rook on h1, teaming up with the queen on d3. So knight f6 may be played, trying to defend the h7 pawn, but this is when you can go pawn to e4. You can see how easy this line is to play. And after the top played move pawn to d6, you can see with your own eyeballs, you have so many tricky things to do, one of which is knight g6. Because black can't even take your knight, else they are going to lose their rook. So they may play rook g8, and now you simply take their bishop. After queen takes, you go pawn to e5, attacking the knight. If de, you take back. And after knight d5, what else? Queen takes h7, threatening to capture the rook. And in case you are wondering how you are going to develop your queen side, just go bishop d2, knight c3, and castle long. You are ahead in development and with a better pawn structure. Let me show you one more line in the typical Dutch defense where you can quickly crush your opponents who try to be stubborn with pawn to f5 on move 1. E.g., you start with d4 and black responds with f5, the Dutch defense. Instead of playing normal moves like c4, knight f3 or whatever, you simply go queen d3, attacking the f5 pawn directly. And I don't know how many times you're going to see your opponents blundering with knight f6. You can see that's the top played move in the Lichess database, which allows you to take this pawn for free. But let's not assume that black is going to play pawn to e6, the second most played move. I mean, trying to hold on to their pawn. But the whole idea is to go pawn to g4 next, kind of the wing gambit, right? So that if pawn takes, you give away another pawn in an effort to open up more lines, just like what we do in the Bangkok gambit or in the wing gambit. Bishop takes h3. In this position lacks continuity, but knight takes h3 has this idea of knight g5 next. Black can't even play pawn to h6 here because of queen g6 check. So if knight f6, you just go knight g5 again. Pawn to h6 is a blunder because of queen g6 check. And on the next move, you might end up winning the game or winning your opponent's queen or even the rook. I mean, pop, pop, game over. Anyway, so this is just how deadly this line can be. I mean, even if black doesn't play h6, allowing you to go queen g6 check, and let's say they go pawn to g6, well, you can still sack on h7 like this, intending to capture the knight next. Worse off, if knight takes h7, you can go queen takes g6 check, and after king e7, you first of all take the knight, after which you win black's queen on d8 with bishop g5 check. The final alternative worth trying is in the Caro-Kann defense. Let's see how that goes. So as usual, we begin with pawn to e4, then black responds with c6. Then from here, instead of going pawn to d4, we now play knight to f3. Moves are well known, so from here, black will still go pawn to d5. After we put our pawn on d3, so you see a lot of people taking on e4. So from here, I recommend knight to g5. If pawn takes, we take with our bishop, not our pawn. So from here, I have highlighted some arrows here. You can see all the arrows in red are blunders. For example, you see that knight to f6 is by far the most common response by black, which is a blunder. Let's see what happens if black responds with knight to f6. By this time, you already know the move. Yep, it is knight takes on f7, forking the queen and the rook yet again. If king takes on f7, you should go bishop g6, covering the whole of this diagonal. The king cannot go back again, winning the free queen in just 8 moves. Okay, that was against the Caro-Kann defense. Let's go to the next one. Number 9 with the Scotch gambit. So e4 as always. Black responds with e5, natural move. Knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. Knight c6, defending the pawn on e5. Pawn to d4, right away attacking the pawn on e5. 90% of the time you're going to see black taking on d4 with his pawn, after which you should play knight g5 again. So what's the idea behind knight g5? The idea is that if black plays pawn to h6, since he's not comfortable with this knight on g5, you should again sacrifice on f7, forking the queen and the rook. And here the only sensible move is for black to take the knight on f7, after which you're going to play bishop c4 check. And in this position, there are about 6 responses that black can play. And believe it or not, only one is the best response, and it is the most weirdest. So let's see, for example, if black plays something else, let's say king to e8. Here you are going to play queen h5 check, king e7, queen f7 check, king d6, bishop f4 check, knight e5 is forced, queen d5 check, king e7, and then queen e5 checkmate. And so after bishop c4 check, black can also try to go king e7, after which you should continue with pawn to c3, attacking black's pawn on d4. And believe it or not, most of the times your opponents are going to take that pawn on c3, after which you should now play knight takes on c3, aiming to go knight d5 check. And then anyways, you should play knight d5 check, forcing an exchange of knights. Then after knight takes on d5, you go queen takes on d5, threatening to checkmate black's king as highlighted. For example, here black can try to play queen to e8, after which you should play bishop g5 check, h takes g5 is forced, queen takes on g5, king d6, and then you finish the game in style with a move castling long with check, knight d4 is forced, rook takes on d4 check, king c6, and then queen b5 checkmate. Now I have a full video on this unknown gambit, so you can also go and check it out on my channel to know more about this gambit. So let's move on and go to the last one. Okay, number 10. Now we are viewing this from black's perspective because I didn't want to end this video without showing you how you can also take advantage of the somewhat weak f2 square. So the trap that I'm about to show you works against the queen's gambit setup. For example, after d4 by white, here you should play knight to f6, c4 by white, then play e5. White is going to think as if you just want to play the normal Budapest defense. For example, if white takes on e5, they're expecting you to go knight g4 attacking the pawn on e5, and after knight to f3 defending the pawn on e5. This is what white is expecting you to do. White is expecting you to go bishop b4 check, or he's expecting you to play bishop c5 eyeballing the f2 square, which is not exactly what we are intending to do. And so to shock our opponent, we are going to give him another pawn on d6. So here our opponent will be like, what is he even doing? I think it's just giving me a pawn. So most of your amateur opponents would take this pawn on d6, after which you should take back with your bishop and not the pawn. And believe it or not, this position has been reached in hundreds of games already, according to the Lichess database. Here the third common response by white is pawn to h3. The idea is that they are not happy with this knight sitting on g4. And so they want this knight to go back to f6, but that's not what we are going to do, because again, just like in the Tennison gambit, we are going to sacrifice on f2, forking the queen and the rook. And the only sensible move for black in this position is to take with the king, after which we are going to give them a check on g3 with our bishop covering the whole of this diagonal. Again, note that white's king cannot go back, and that's how white loses his queen in just 8 moves. By the way, this is just a mirror of the Tennison gambit, nothing so special about it. Now the trap on f2 also works if white begins with knight to f3, for example, the Zukertort opening. Here we should respond with a move pawn to d6, which is the Pirc invitation. White will think as if we just want to play the Pirc. From here you see white responding with a move pawn to c4, after which you should respond with a move knight to f6, as if you want to fianchetto your bishop on the king side. Then the second most common move in this position is pawn to d4 by white, after which you should play pawn to e5, attacking white's pawn on d4 and also intending to go to the e4 square. So you will see black taking on e5, after which you should play knight g4 again, attacking white's pawn on e5. And believe it or not, in this position, the most common response by white, according to the Lichess database, is pawn takes on d6, after which you should take with the bishop again. If h3, you already know what to do. Yep, knight takes on f2, forking the queen and the rook again. Now back to the Budapest position. It's not always that you should go pawn to d6, because this is very predictable. And so the best move that I like to play here is knight to c6, just attacking the pawn on e5 twice, just like in the Tennison gambit. And so if white plays bishop f4, defending that pawn on e5, I recommend that you go bishop c5, eyeballing the f2 square. And so in most cases, you are going to see white playing pawn to e3, covering the f2 square. Just like in the Scandinavian defense, it is in this position where I recommend to play the move pawn to f6. The idea is that if white doesn't do anything about our pawn on f6, we are going to take back on e5 with our knight, which is on g4, and it is going to be a normal game from here. If queen d5, we are more than ready to go bishop b4 check, and we continue from there. Surprisingly enough, in the Lichess database, the most common move here is e takes f6, which we want to see on the board, because from here we are going to take on f6 with our queen, eyeballing the b2 pawn, just like in the Tennison gambit, guys. So again, in the Lichess database, the most common response by white is knight c3, covering the b2 pawn, which is a terrible blunder because, yep, you guessed it right, knight takes on f2, forking the queen and the rook, again, just like in the Tennison gambit. So the idea is that if king takes on f2, we take his bishop on f4, and if, let's say, knight d5, attacking our queen on f4, we should now play queen h6, maintaining the pressure on the e3 square. And if white thinks he can capture our pawn on c7, for example, knight to c7 check, we just attack his knight with our king. And if knight takes our rook on a8, it is game over, because we are now going to play queen takes on e3 check, king g3, queen f2 check, king h3, d6 check on the king by the bishop. And after, let's say, g4 by white, we now play h5, knight to h4 covering the discovery. Then we play h takes on g4 check, and the only move by white is to play queen takes g4, rook takes on h4, checkmate. And before I end the video, let me show you how to play against the Tennison Gambit as black in order to avoid all these traps. After knight f6, pawn to d3, pawn takes, bishop takes, instead of playing pawn to h6, let's say you're playing black, the move to consider is knight c6, because knight c6 indirectly protects the queen in advance, okay? So you won't have to worry about knight takes f7. For example, if knight takes f7, you can just safely take that knight, and if bishop g6, you can take that bishop as well, even with your king, so that if queen takes d8, now you can simply take back with your knight. And lo, just like that, you are up by 2 pieces. Look at this. Anyway, and that's all for today, you guys. Let me know which episode of the Tennison Gambit you liked the most in the comment section down below. And if at all you would love to see more of these kinds of content where I compile my favorite videos in one collection, of course, to make it easier for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, bye bye.